A man I know spent 41 years as a pipe fitter. He could read a room. He knew when someone was working an angle. He sat across negotiating tables for 4 decades and never once let someone get the better of him. And then he retired. And 8 months later, he signed something he spent the next 4 years trying to get out of. How does that happen to a man like that? How does someone who spent his whole career knowing exactly when he was being handled end up there? And how many of you have wondered, quietly, whether you'd do the same? I'm Mike, 2 years retired. I didn't sign one, but not because I'm smarter than that man. What protected me was something already sitting in my garage. And once I explain what I mean, you're going to understand the timeshare trap in a way nobody in that industry wants you to. If this is the kind of honest conversation you came here for, subscribe and hit the bell. And before we start, one question for the comments. What is the thing you already have, the project or purpose nobody had to sell you, that already feels like yours? Write it down. It matters more than you think right now. Because what I'm about to tell you is the one thing that actually protects you from that room, and it has nothing to do with reading the fine print. There's a conference room in a resort in Branson, Missouri. I've never been in it, but I know what it looks like because Phil described it to me, and Phil's neighbor described it to Phil, and the description hasn't changed in 40 years because they designed it to stay exactly the same. The chairs are comfortable. Not hotel lobby comfortable. Softer than that. The kind of soft that tells your body to relax before your mind has agreed to anything. The lighting is warm, there's coffee and pastries, and someone is going to come in shortly and be very glad you're here. And the presentation that follows is going to be professional and friendly in a way that makes the thing being sold seem not like a product at all, but like a decision you'd have been crazy not to have made years ago. Phil's neighbor, I'll call him Ray because that's not his name, but it's close enough, walked into a room like that on a Tuesday afternoon in the second year of his retirement. He was 63. He had spent 41 years as a pipe fitter, union shop, heavy industrial. He knew how to read people. He knew when someone was working an angle. He had sat across the table from management negotiators for 4 decades and knew, he would have told you himself, when a room was designed to get something out of him. He walked out of that room 3 hours later having signed something he spent the next 4 years trying to get out of. I want to sit with that for a second, because the way most people tell this story is wrong. Most people tell it like Ray made a mistake. He got fooled. He wasn't paying attention. He didn't read the fine print. And if you tell it that way, you walk away feeling superior. You think, that wouldn't happen to me. I don't think that's what happened. What happened to Ray in that room wasn't about the fine print. It was about where he was in his life when he walked through that door. 8 months into retirement, still figuring out what the days were for, still listening for a phone that wasn't going to ring the way it used to. That is the same place a lot of men are when they find themselves in rooms like that. That's what I've been thinking about. Not the contract, not the exit strategies, the timing, the specific window when this gets people. Because once I started asking around, asking Phil, asking some of the men at the Votech, I realized that window is not random. It's predictable. And if it's predictable, it's worth naming before you end up in the room. I'm Mike. I've been retired 2 years. I didn't sign one, but I want to be honest about what I almost did, and what stopped me, and what I think the difference was. Not because I'm proud of it. I'm not sure how much of it was wisdom, and how much was just the luck of having a specific thing waiting in the garage. But the pattern I've seen across the men I know is real, and it's worth understanding before Tuesday afternoon in Branson. How many of you know a Ray? How many of you have heard that story from a friend, a brother-in-law, a man from your old shop, with that particular combination of anger and embarrassment in his voice? The anger at the company or the salesman, and underneath it, quieter, the part where he can't quite explain how a man who did what he did for as long as he did it ended up signing something he knew was wrong before the pen left his hand. That is the thing nobody says plainly, and I want to say it plainly, because I think understanding it is the only thing that actually protects you. Not reading the contract more carefully, not going in with a friend who can pull you out, understanding what the room is designed to find in you, and knowing whether it's there. The skills I spent 36 years building on the production floor did not transfer the way I thought they would. I could read a hydraulic system going wrong at 50 feet. I had a diagnostic instinct that was real and hard-earned. And none of it prepared me for what it felt like to be in month 6 of retirement with nothing specific that needed me. That is where the vulnerability lives, in the gap between who you were at the plant and who you are now. That gap has a weight to it that doesn't get talked about honestly. So let me try. The first 5 months I was fine, better than fine. I had the Mustang, a '67 fastback I bought from an estate sale in Belvedere in 2013 for $4,000, 60% disassembled, stored in a barn for what the son estimated was a decade, but was probably longer given the state of the wiring. I'd worked on it weekends and occasional evenings for 9 years, always constrained by time, by the bandwidth left after a full week on the floor. When the buyout came and I was out the door by that Friday, 4 days from the offer to the exit, which still sits in me in a way I haven't fully worked out, the first thing I thought about after the money was the car. I had time now, real, unscheduled time. And for 5 months, that was everything. In the garage by 7 every morning. The work was mine, the pace was mine, the standard was mine. No production schedule, no 2 a.m. calls. I had spent 36 years organized around other people's urgencies and had not understood, genuinely had not understood, until the urgency was gone, how much of my daily energy had been shaped by problems I didn't choose. Month 6 arrived. The car reached a stage that required waiting, parts on order, bodywork curing, a repair that needed assessment before I could move forward. For the first time in 5 months, I had a day with nothing specific to do. I got up at the same time, made coffee, went to the garage and looked at the car the way you look at a machine in a hold state, checking, not touching, went back inside. Karen had already left for the practice. The house was quiet in the particular way it gets quiet when you're the only one in it, and you've just confirmed there's nothing that needs you. I sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes without doing anything I could have described afterward. Not depressed, not panicking, just untethered. The car was the tether, and the car was temporarily unavailable, and without it, I was a man with skills that had nowhere to land. Now imagine that day arrives and you don't have the Mustang, or the Mustang equivalent, whatever the thing is in your garage or the back of your mind that you've been telling yourself you'll get to when you have time. Imagine it hasn't materialized yet. You've been busy with logistics, with the transition, with the administrative tail end of a long career that doesn't stop the day you walk out the door. That is the day where the conference room finds you. Phil told me once, the timeshare industry doesn't target retirees. It targets a specific kind of retiree in a specific window, 8 months to 2 years out, before they've built the rhythm, after the relief of the exit has worn off, and before they've found what replaced the work. That is the window. That is who was sitting in that chair when Ray signed. Now, I want to be fair here, because I know one man who bought a timeshare and genuinely does not regret it. Karen's co-worker at the dental practice, her husband, retired teacher, 30 years in a middle school science classroom. He bought one about a year before he retired. He books it every February, takes his grandkids, same week every year. He told Karen it was the best thing he ever did for his retirement. I believe him. But here is the difference, and it is the only difference that matters. He walked into that room knowing what he wanted. He had already decided he was going to take his grandkids somewhere warm every February. He was not in the gap. He was not untethered. He was a man with a plan who found a vehicle that fit the plan. Same product, completely different story. The same pitch that handled Ray handed that man exactly what he was looking for. The room didn't know the difference. He did. What Ray told Phil, after he finally talked about it, was that when he walked into that room, he'd been having a hard month. Quietly hard. Nothing dramatic. Just a grinding sense that the day didn't have enough shape to it, that his skills were sitting in a box somewhere he couldn't find. And someone walked into that room and told him he'd earned this. I want to spend some time on that phrase because I think it's doing more work in that pitch than anything else in the room. You've earned this. Think about who that sentence lands on. A man who got up before 5 a.m. for 41 years, who missed things, recitals, dinners, weekends, who worked in conditions most people who didn't grow up around trades don't understand. The heat, the hours, the specific exhaustion of caring intensely about keeping something running when the thing stopping would cost other people their livelihoods. That man has been waiting for someone to say, "You've earned this," for a long time. Not because he's weak, because he has actually earned something, and the world he's been living in for 4 decades hasn't been particularly interested in saying so. The pitch knows this. The comfortable chairs, the warm lighting, the genuine gladness to see you, all of it is constructed to say, wordlessly and constantly, "You deserve to be here." And when the explicit version arrives, "You've earned this. This is what the work was for," it lands in a place that has been waiting for it. There is nothing wrong with believing you earned something. The work was real. The desire to have something to show for it is legitimate. The wrong part is letting someone else define what that something is, and then charge you for it annually with a maintenance fee structure you only find in the documents you didn't have time to read in the room. The man who walks into that room already knowing what he earned, specifically in terms he could describe without a brochure, that man is nearly impossible to handle, because the pitch has no purchase. You can't sell a version of someone's retirement to a man who already has a version of his retirement. Phil said it to me once in a way I haven't been able to shake. Nobody got timeshared who had somewhere else to be. Not somewhere else physically, somewhere else in their own life. A thing that was already theirs, already answering the question before someone could sell them an answer to it. Phil said it to me once in a way I haven't been able to shake. Nobody got timeshared who had somewhere else to be. Not somewhere else physically, somewhere else in their own life. A thing that was already theirs, already answering the question before someone could sell them an answer to it. I think that's right. And I think there's something in it that goes beyond timeshare specifically, because the timeshare is just one version of the pitch. It is the most organized version, the most professionally delivered. But the pitch, the idea that your retirement needs to be purchased, assembled, chosen from a menu of available options, presented by someone who profits from the choice. That pitch is everywhere in the first year. It is in the travel packages, and the club memberships, and the golf communities, and the active adult developments. All of it selling the same thing, a version of the next chapter that someone else designed, and that you are invited to inhabit for a fee. The men I grew up around, and the men I worked with for 36 years, were not naive about being sold things. On the production floor, when a vendor came in to pitch a new piece of equipment or a service contract, there was a specific kind of attention in the room. Nobody went in unprepared. Everybody understood that the person across the table had an interest that was not identical to theirs. Nobody told those same men that retirement has a sales floor too, that the skills they spent 40 years developing to protect the plant's interests needed to come with them when they walked out the gate for the last time. That the transition itself, the gap, the untethered season, would make them, briefly and specifically, the most reachable they had been since they were 23 years old and didn't know what they didn't know. I think about that every time I drive past the resort billboards on the highway. The ones with the families on the beach, the ones that say, "You deserve this," the ones that have a phone number and the words, "no obligation." There's nothing dishonest in those words taken individually, but together, in that specific order, aimed at a man who just spent 40 years working hard enough to believe he deserves something and hasn't yet figured out what that something is. Together, those words are a very efficient machine. And I spent 36 years fixing machines. I know one when I see it. I think that's right. Signing something in that gap, in that window before the thing is found, is exactly the wrong moment to make a 20-year commitment. I want to tell you what happened after Ray signed, because the contract is one story. What came after is the one worth understanding. The first year he used it, he and his wife went to the resort in October. The unit was not what the presentation room had looked like, but it wasn't bad. He told Phil, It was fine. The word fine sat between them like something that didn't fit the invoice. The second year, the maintenance fee arrived. Ray had known the number in theory. Seeing it as a separate line item, subject to annual adjustment, produced a feeling he described to Phil as finding out the thing you thought you owned was renting space in your life. He tried to book the same week the following October. Unavailable. He took a different week. A fine trip. Fine again. By year 3, Ray was doing math he should have done in the room. Not just purchase price versus hotel cost, though he did that too, and the number was not good, but the math of the thing as a presence in his retirement, the annual fee, the booking window that never had what he wanted, the awareness that he owned something he couldn't use the way it was sold and couldn't get rid of. The resale market was what Phil called a polite fiction. Ray got a quote in year 3, $400 for something he'd paid $18,000 for. He kept paying the fee. Every October, a fine trip to somewhere that wasn't where he wanted to go. What broke the silence was his son-in-law. Not because Ray told him, because Ray's wife told her daughter, who told her husband, who knew something about how these exits work. Not legal exits. That is its own world, and I am not qualified to walk you through it. But the son-in-law knew people who had been through this. He knew the exit was possible, would cost something, would take time, and that the first step was saying it plainly enough to let someone help. Ray told Phil, the hardest part wasn't the money. It was admitting it. A man who spent 41 years as a pipe fitter, who could tell by touch whether a joint would hold, admitting he had walked into a room and been handled. That took 2.5 years. The silence made everything worse. The fee kept coming. The resentment built in the background of his retirement like a hydraulic leak that nobody was looking for because nobody was allowed to acknowledge there was a problem. The thing that was supposed to be a reward became the thing he dreaded opening the mail about. He got out eventually. It cost him something. And what he told Phil when it was done, Phil told me this over coffee last fall, was this: I should have known what I wanted before I walked in that room. If I'd known, they couldn't have sold me. That sentence has been sitting with me for months. I should have known what I wanted before I walked in that room. Here is what I've come to believe, from my own experience and from Phil's, and from the men at the Votech who come in Thursday mornings with questions that are less about junction boxes than they look like. For 30 or 40 years, your competence had an address. You went somewhere. Problems were there. Problems needed you. You applied yourself. And that gave the day its shape and gave you, this is what nobody says plainly, a way to know your own worth without having to think about it, because it was demonstrated every time you showed up. When you leave, the problems don't come with you. The address closes. You are left holding something you carried for 40 years. The knowledge, the instinct, the capacity, with nowhere obvious to put it. That is the gap. That is the weight of the quiet kitchen at 9:15 on a Wednesday. And the conference room in Branson is designed for exactly that moment. It offers your competence an address again. Not in so many words, but the feeling of being courted, of being told your judgment matters here, is a simulation of being needed. When you've been without that for 8 months, the simulation is convincing. It's not a trick. It's a pressure point on a real wound. The loss of a place where your competence mattered is a genuine loss. The wound is legitimate, but it doesn't heal in a conference room. It heals in the places where you find, slowly and imperfectly, new addresses for your competence. A project that is genuinely yours. A person who actually needs what you know how to do. I did not plan the Votech. A teacher called me on a recommendation and I went once expecting to hate it. 14 months later, I'm still going, and I still can't fully explain why it works. But on the Thursday mornings when I'm in that classroom watching a 17-year-old figure out for the first time how to read a circuit, I am not a man with skills in a box and nowhere to put them. I am the person those skills were always for. That feeling, that is what the conference room is selling a simulacrum of. That's what's worth finding the real version of before you need to be sold a substitute. They can't sell you a version of your retirement if you've already built one. So here's what I want to leave you with. Not advice, not a checklist. If you are in the gap right now, 8 months out, 14 months out, 2 years out, still not sure what the days are for, I want you to know the gap is not permanent. It doesn't mean you retired wrong. It means you're in the part that takes the longest and gets talked about the least. The part where you're building something that can't be hurried because it has to be genuinely yours. What I would write to myself at month 8 is something like this. You are going to feel in the next few months that there's something available that will make this easier. A trip, a commitment, a purchase that will give the next chapter shape before the next chapter has figured out its own shape. Be suspicious of that feeling. Not because wanting relief from the gap is wrong, it isn't, but because the things that actually fill the gap are built slowly from the inside, not signed for in an afternoon. The car in the garage was already mine. It was already the answer. It just needed the time that the plant hadn't given me yet. Yours is out there too. Go find it before Tuesday afternoon in Branson. One thing in the comments, and this is a real question. What's yours? Not the timeshare, the other thing. The thing that is already yours, or that you're building, or that you've been meaning to get back to for 20 years. Write it down. Just the one thing. The first thing that comes is usually the true one. I read every one. If what you heard today felt true to something you've been carrying, I'd be glad if you subscribed. Hit the bell. Not because the numbers mean something to me, because I'm going to keep saying this stuff as honestly as I can, and I'd rather say it to someone listening. If you keep showing up, I'll keep being straight with you. That's the deal. The car is 90% done. 6 more months, my son Jason would tell you, with affection and a fair amount of skepticism, because I've been saying 6 months for 2 years. He's not wrong. I'm not in a hurry. That's still new. Take care of yourself.